Wonderful. It is my great pleasure to be the one to introduce Dr. Tong today because I've been trying to get at her for about 2 years now. I tried in the beginning, and I don't know whether the website, universe was against us, but I didn't really reach her. And I kept looking for her absolutely drop dead gorgeous book in the public library, and they didn't have it. They didn't have it. So I suggested that they get it on board. Um, and then I ordered it myself. And this thing is just, pardon me while I pimp your book, Dr. Tong. Uh, but
Thank you for
this
doing
thing
it for
is
me.
gorgeous. It is a wonderful picture book. Just every page is lush pictures. And I noticed that she wrote it so that just about anybody can understand this thing. I really appreciate that, Dr. Tong, because a lot of our audience are younger and need not to be buried alive in scientific technology. So that's really great. I looked today in Los Angeles Public Library, and huzzah, they have an electronic version. So if you want to get in line at LAPL, you can enjoy it as well. But anyway, doing an introduction as usual, we looked up Wenfei on her website, and oh my God, her CV is like 5 pages long, single space type. Uh, so she is a really experienced, all around enthusiast of all things of saving the planets. And I looked in her first paragraph, and her ultimate aim is to inspire as many people as possible to relate to and care for the natural world, which really overlaps with our mission nicely. So she's just perfect for us. Just a few words here about her. She grew up in Singapore, and then she went on to undergraduate at Princeton and Oxford, not too bad there, and has been teaching at Montana and Alaska, fundraising for conservation organizations, and guiding natural history tours in Tanzania, Central Asia, Galapagos, and Montana. So I mean, she is a person of the world, clearly. So that is lovely. She is widely published. She has another book called Understanding Bird Behavior, which is reflected in this current book too, The Bird Love. They're both published by Princeton University Press. She does a lot of things with BirdLife International, if you all are aware of that. She does podcasts and radio, public talks, and she publishes not just in the scientific literature, but in Natural History magazine, Psychology Today, Popular Science, and lots of other, very readable things. So she's very aware of the world as her oyster. She's currently with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So we are in very high company indeed. And she is the science editor for the Center for Conservation Media. As I said before, she was she does tours. If you're in Missoula, Montana, you can get a bespoke tour, lucky you. And she also works sometimes with the University of Alaska, where she was in the Department of Biology there. So she does get around. She volunteers for bird surveys for about 5 Audubon chapters. So she's with us. She understands us. And she's also consultant for projects that combine music and birds, and in the publication Planet Birdsong, which is pretty darn cool. The other thing that really caught my eye was that she has a publication that was so cute. It's How to Trick Someone Else into Raising Your Children by Forging Eggs, which made me think maybe I needed to consult with you. I need somebody else to raise my chicks. But anyway, no more blither blather from me. I just want to say it's with great pleasure that we introduce her, and can't wait to hear what you have to say to us today, Wenfei Tong.
Oh, thank you so much, Marianne. I feel a bit intimidated by that introduction, but I should preface this by saying you may hear my chick vocalizing at some point, and apologies in advance. I've explained to him that I'm working and telling other people about birds, so he's supposed not supposed to interrupt, but he's 2, and so we just got back from Singapore, and he's feeling a bit needy. But let me see if I can share my presentation before I. This is always tricky because I find that if I do the wrong thing, I can't see everyone. Um, does that work? Okay. So as I said, we just got back from a lovely family holiday in Singapore, which was the first time I've been back since I went to college. And one of the birds that's become increasingly common in Singapore, so I just had to put a picture up to show all of you, is the red jungle fowl, which is shown here just in my parents' backyard. And this is the ancestor of all domestic oh, it's the descendant of the ancestor of all domestic chickens. So it was really cool to show that to my son. Um, Here we are. He's looking at a red jungle fowl with 2 hens in the Botanic Gardens in Singapore. So if any of you haven't been to Singapore, I highly encourage you to go to the Botanic Gardens. It's a lovely old colonial Botanic Gardens with a lot of modern touches, and it's pretty good for wildlife, and especially lost birds or sort of vagrant birds that you might not see otherwise. And the only other nod to my offspring before we get into the rest of the talk is I hope it's okay that I made this talk a little personal, because one of the things I like doing a lot is, in addition to writing, I've always liked drawing a lot. And I find that that's a nice way to connect with people and to express something about the animal that's not just purely factual or observable with a lot of repetitive experiments. And I was just talking to Richard about genetic and the genetic predictors of various diseases. My son had quite an easily predicted one, craniosynostosis, where one of the sutures in the skull fuses prematurely. So he had to wear a helmet. But he's named Martin after the bird. So I painted these martins on his helmet, which was a nice excuse to do a little painting. And now when I ask him what his name is, he'll say Purple Martin instead of just Martin. Which so this kid is pretty well schooled in birds. Um, but yeah, he's a lot of fun. And oh yes, I forgot. The beginning of the talk is very much about, my own personal love for birds and what where I find inspiration and how I hope to inspire others. So this is a little card I drew for his helmet orthotist. And it's a Puerto Rican toady. And I think in one of the books I mentioned that Puerto Rican toadies, unlike the other toady species, are cooperative breeders. So they do a bit of shared child rearing. And I thought this was a nice nod to our orthotist who really helped our kid a lot. So Martin is the very, very fat fledgling being fed on the right hand side, and the hardworking orthotist is helping out with this massive chick. Um, and I've sort of blurred the lines from pretty early on. I think when I was about 5 or 6, I decided my mother was a Doberman Pinscher and that my father was actually at that time I was really into dogs, so my father was a Mastiff because I grew up in a big city in Singapore and I hadn't quite discovered birds. So the only thing I really zeroed in on to ID was dog breeds. And so everyone to me was a different, I would assign a dog breed to everyone's personality, everyone I knew. And this slide is from the acknowledgements of my PhD because I couldn't find photos. It's customary to show people photographs of themselves, all the people you want to thank. And instead of doing that, I thought it might be nicer, since I couldn't find photos of everyone, to thank them by assigning an animal to them and then drawing it. And I don't know if any of you have been to the Galapagos, but one of the things that inspired me to go to Princeton was this couple, Rosemary and Peter Grant, who just came out with lovely autobiographies. I know Peter's is out. I think Rosemary's is coming out soon. She decided to write her own. And they're really well known for documenting natural selection in action, one of the first studies to do so in the Darwin's finches in the Galapagos. So The Beak of the Finch is a fantastic popular science read if anyone hasn't read it. That's and Peter and Rosemary are down on the bottom as blue-footed boobies because they have this hilarious story of being doing their research. You know, they would go to this island in the Galapagos for over 40 years, Daphne Major, to measure their finches. And they would hear the tourist boats coming past, and someone would be talking, droning on about their research and their work and the Darwin's finches. And then suddenly they heard, oh, look, two blue-footed boobies are on the edge of the crater. And they sort of thought, who are, where? So they grabbed their binoculars. And after a while, they realized that the tour operator meant them. They mistook the two humans, the two scientists, for blue-footed boobies. And so I've always thought that was a really sweet and funny story. And then moving on, after Alaska, I did a short stint in New York City, which coincided with the pandemic. So I do a bunch of natural history, sketching, journaling, and it was really fun to be in Prospect Park during the pandemic and just drawing the birds that I would see every day during spring migration, which we're all looking forward to now. And during my PhD, I would often go to this lovely place in northern Massachusetts called Plum Island, which is thankfully one of the places that, so this is a yellow warbler that was flying around during spring migration on Plum Island. And I'm just, as part of my current job with conservation media at Cornell, I'm hoping that we'll be able to support some of the salt marsh conservation efforts in Massachusetts, both in Plum Island and the surrounding region, but also all the way down to Florida, northeastern Florida. And oh yes, this is one of the only Californian series of pictures I could find. So it's not quite Los Angeles. I know you're the oldest, that you're the first Audubon chapter for the whole of California, which is amazing. Was actually taken in San Diego, but I just loved the personality in this pelican. And so a lot of what inspires me is just the individualism that you can see in a lot of birds when you just take the time to look at them a bit more closely, rather than, ticking them off as another species on the list and moving on. So I'm always urging people to take a moment and enjoy the behavior, even if it's a really, really common bird. In Singapore, the Javan myna has really taken over as a very common, a bit like the common pigeon, a bit like the rock pigeon in much of Europe and the US. And but it's actually quite a striking bird. And so, yeah, Martin was definitely pointing out the Javan mynas after the first day. And a bird personality that I really got close to was during my undergraduate time in Princeton. I was really fortunate to get to go to Kenya to study zebras actually for my senior thesis. And there I met this character named Valchi, who is an Egyptian vulture. And he would come and have porridge with us every morning. He's a tame vulture and very long lived. And Egyptian vultures are just especially interesting because they're so intelligent. I think they're one of the earliest documented examples of birds using tools. And that doesn't seem so wild now because we know about all these crows that commonly drop things in front of cars at the zebra crossing so that they can go and pick up the rest of the food once the cars have to stop at a red light and things like that. But Jane Goodall and her then husband documented birds like vulture, these Egyptian vultures, opening ostrich eggs with tools in the form of rocks. So this isn't my photo, but this is a different Egyptian vulture, basically using a rock to hammer open an ostrich egg. And for anyone who's ever tried to open an ostrich egg, they're pretty hard shelled. They're hard work to open. So this was an ingenious invention. And oh, I think one of the members, I'm guessing you're one of the members, wrote an email to me earlier today asking me to talk about hummingbirds. So there is this particular nod to hummingbirds, but I would be happy to talk more if there's time after the talk. So the two birds on the left are actually sunbirds, and the two on the right are hummingbirds. And I put this up because my PhD and a lot of my early interests were really in evolutionary biology and convergent evolution, where you've got entirely different species evolving independently, the same way of doing something is really a common theme, and a theme I find very inspiring and interesting in evolution. So I grew up being very used to seeing sunbirds, the ones on the left, as all around me. And then when I came to America or went bird watching in Costa Rica or Jamaica or something, that same niche of feeding on nectar and having a very small body and flying very fast is, if anything, done even better by hummingbirds. But hummingbirds their closest relative is the swifts, which is another cool example of convergent evolution. Swifts and swallows are also not closely related to each other. But the reason I wanted to talk about hummingbirds here is also that one of my colleagues, Maud Baldwin, was really interested in how birds like hummingbirds that rely so much on sugar have a taste for sugar. It turns out that most birds don't even have a sweet taste receptor because they don't actually eat that much sugar. And without finding something rewarding, you don't really go and look for it. So the question was, firstly, if hummingbirds tasted sweetness, and secondly, if they did, how they did that. And so she did a lot of fancy molecular genetics and found out that the gene that the hummingbird sweet receptor evolved from is actually a copy of the umami taste receptor. And umami is essentially the taste of meat or something savory. It's the receptor that receives amino acids, which are the breakdown, the building blocks of proteins. So MSG and stuff like that. I just found that fascinating. And swifts don't, the closest relative of hummingbirds, have plenty of umami because they eat insects, right? So they have plenty of these umami receptors, but no sweet taste receptors. And I think the next question is, do sunbirds have a similar, how have they cracked this problem of needing to be able to taste sweetness? So more to be discovered. And another example of convergence I thought was lovely is just these interspecies relationships. So here we've got an oxpecker, two red-billed oxpeckers on a Cape buffalo in Africa, in Kenya. And you've also got a relationship between magpies and elk in North America. So basically birds and large ungulates. And in both systems, the birds will sometimes, especially with oxpeckers, peck a little too hard. And they're supposed to be, the idea is it's a mutualism, and the birds are busy getting ticks off the backs of the large ungulates. And the large ungulates are they're sort of helping to, provide a nice perch for the birds. But the birds often warn the ungulates as well of approaching danger. What's fun about the magpie and the elk story is there was a group that looked at the personality of the magpies and the elk. And it turned out that the best partnerships took place between rather shy elk, which allowed the magpies to perch for longer, and bolder magpie that were brave enough essentially to sit on an elk's back for a while. And as Marianne mentioned, I spent some time in Montana. So in addition to looking at elk and things like that, I just loved this opportunity to go and look at snow geese migrating through northern Montana. And there is part of understanding bird behavior does touch on migration, but I won't talk much about it here. I just wanted to mention that there are two main parts of bird behavior that I won't concentrate on so much because we'll talk more about family life in this talk. So migration's one, and birdsong is another. This Western Meadowlark song always makes me think of Montana or the West, the prairies. And I love that sound. But there's books and books and books written on birdsong, so it's a bit much. Um, so I'll get straight to courtship, I suppose, and how to attract a mate. This is a weaver from Zambia that was building a nest, and a lot of weaver species will use a nest to attract a mate. So here the male's got to build multiple nests, and he typically shows off by hanging under the nest and flapping his wings vigorously. And the females will come along and inspect the nests, and if they like the nests, then he's a happy chap. But if they don't, he's got to try again, or worse still, they might tear it up and really force him to build more nests. It's pretty, but the nest building behavior itself is fascinating. I wish someone would study the genetics behind that behavior. Um, another way birds often pick their mates is by appearance, as I'm sure many of you know. So I decided to choose the barn swallow as a nice example of that because um, they're not quite as flashy as the birds of paradise or the peacocks that we are all familiar with. But it's a lovely example of how fashions exercised by at the individual level and choices by individual females can really shape the appearance of different populations of barn swallow males around the world. So here you've got two North American barn swallows, and you notice that they're quite reddish, especially underneath in their bellies. Whereas if the earlier on there was seminal studies done in Europe showing that what females really liked was tail length. And so these experiments were really clever. They basically either shortened the tail feathers of the barn swallows or artificially lengthened them by gluing on extra tail feather to males. And then they looked at how many kids each male had by doing the DNA fingerprinting. And whether it was by getting more mates or just by being more attractive to a single female and having her invest more in the kids, males with longer tail feathers, artificially longer tail feathers, had more chicks, both in terms of extraparental um, copulations as well as with their own mate. Whereas males with the shortened tails had far fewer offspring. So this experiment was repeated in North America, and to everyone's surprise, there was no difference with the tail length. It didn't make a difference to a male's reproductive success. And it turns out that what the American females were going for was this reddishness, this rusty orangeness of the breast feathers. So if you artificially apply rouge to the males, that's what attracts him to females, not the tail feathers in North America. And the story seems to be different for different barn swallow populations around the world. They're one of the most widely distributed bird species, so it's a fun one to study. Um, and that, I suppose, brings us to an additional sort of the senior side of things, where you've got things like the extra pair copulations I referred to with the barn swallows. It's a really long phrase that biologists like to use. I mean, it's essentially affairs, right? You've got a pair bonded species that raise where male and female raise the offspring together, but they both also sometimes have copulations with members of other pairs that they're not bonded with. And so right here, you've got a superb fairy wren, which is a very common bird in Australia, and also fascinating for so many other aspects of its biology. It's a cooperative breeder. It's really good at dealing with cuckoo parasites. In this particular instance, what I'm showing is a male displaying to a female that he's trying to woo with a little flower petal. And there are many fairy wren species in Australia, but they tend to pick flowers that complement their plumage in color. So in this case, superb fairy wrens, because they're blue, like orange or yellowish petals. And the kicker is they tend to display, bring petals only to females that are not their long-term mate. So they do mate for a long time and they do raise offspring together. And in fact, because they're cooperative breeders, many of the sons stay behind and help out as well, help the dominant pair. But the scientists who were studying them were really puzzled as to why how these little affairs took place, because you never saw the female disappear from the nest if you were just watching all day with binoculars. And they finally radio tracked them and found that just before dawn, a female will sneak off to whichever neighboring males really took her fancy. Birds like the songbirds copulate really fast. It's a case of split seconds. So she's back home in her nest before you know it, and before her mate knows it. Or maybe he's received visitors too, so he didn't notice. But what's really entertaining is the males only display to other females, not their long-term mates, and then the females have the choice of deciding who to visit for an extra pair copulation or two. And for a long time, these birds have been the Guinness Book World Record holders in terms of numbers of extra pair, the proportion of the offspring that are fathered by someone else, not the female's long-term mate. So fascinating birds. Another courtship strategy that's really attractive to things like large nature documentaries and things is the lek. And the lek is essentially a dancing ground, a sort of performance area. And the chicken order is really well known for lekking. So these are black grouse in Europe, but birds of paradise are one of the best known leckers. And I just drew black grouse because they're one of the earliest known experiments on what it is that attracts females to males at a lek. A lek is very much a winner takes all situation typically. So you have one or two males that have 99% of the matings, and all the other males are just there displaying away and no one's paying attention to them. But the question is, what makes those one or two males such rock stars, right? Why does everyone go for them? And this experiment was so cute because the experimenters essentially thought, well, maybe the females are using a rule of thumb where they follow each other. And you can see this happen in human societies too. What they did was put out a few dummy females and males, so just dummy females, stuffed females, around a particular male. And they found that if they did that, it created a sense of false popularity around that one male that the biologists had picked. And slowly you would see all these other females walk past and think, oh, that guy's popular. I guess he must be good. And, the popularity built on itself until you had a experimentally created star of the lek. I always find that such an ingenious experiment. And when I was in Alaska, I got to see sharp-tailed grouse, which are one of the many North American chicken species. So they have a hilarious dance too at the leks. If any of you have seen sharp-tailed grouse performing, they spin in little circles like helicopters. It's really entertaining to watch, and they stick their little tails up in the air like you can see this chap doing. There are also other chickens this is a dusky grouse in Montana that are more territorial, that don't just lek. And this was he's charging me because I was on his territory, and he ended up on my friend's knee, I think, trying to get us off his territory. So that was pretty cool. I'll move on from there to what happens when you've established a pair bond or a territory, and look at some of the interesting smart birds or sort of bird relationships that are not just about mating. So this is a raven, North American raven, but one of the really fascinating things about ravens is they don't just mate for a long time and have a really strong pair bond and maintain a large territory. They keep track of all the other relationships and individuals nearby. And they've been known to sabotage the relationships of up and coming couples. So they don't really bother with the super young teenage ravens that are just, a bit clueless and haven't not much of a threat. But they do bother if it's a couple that's young and clearly about to start going really steady and going to be a real threat to their territory. At that point, they will harass that couple and try and break it up before it gets to form. The sort of cognitive feats associated with that are really cool. But just so that we don't only talk about corvids, which are so well known to be smart, I thought I would bring up another chicken, the vulturine guinea fowl in Kenya. This is very closely related to the helmeted guinea fowl that most of you will have seen, and it's often used for eggs and things all over the world. Vulturine guinea fowl are especially adapted to arid areas, so you find it in northern Kenya, Somalia, places like that, and they're beautiful. The feathers are so gorgeous, and they're also surprisingly not that stupid, so they can retain a lot of relationships, keep track of a lot of relationships as well. And so where this research station I used to be at would have a flock of about 60 or 70 guinea fowl running through on a regular basis every morning. And everyone assumed that they were just, headless chickens, like really stupid and just wandering around in this big amorphous group. But it turns out that if you track individuals, they actually spend most of their time in a little family clique, much like North American societies now, nuclear families. But then each nuclear family has its preferred other nuclear families for hanging out with. So it's like going to dinner with a few regular friends and their immediate families rather than having a big village of 70 being, indiscriminately familiar with each other. And another anecdote from Kenya is just these birds' nests. So one of the questions I try to answer in the books is what makes some birds social and other birds not? And a lot of that seems to be to do with the environment, the harshness of the environment. And so these are gray-capped social weaver nests in a tree, and it's almost like a precursor of what a human village or condominium might be like. The birds are not necessarily all helping each other, but they're nesting very close together. And here's a gray-capped social weaver close up. Um, Whereas, we all know with things like American robins, everyone's got their own territory and there's enough food and safety for everyone to be on their own. This in particular is resonating with me because this female robin is clearing away the feces, a little fecal sac from its chicks. And I've just been trying to toilet train my son, so it's been a lot of fecal clearing in the nest. Um, and once you've had a nest and you found a mate, you've got a territory and you've got a nest, one of the chapters in Bird Love deals largely with chicks. And here I've got barn owl chicks because a lot of the raptors I just find fascinating in the sense that they overproduce most of the time. They have an heir and they have a spare. And in this case, with barn owls in particular, it's almost like the couple expects most of the offspring, some of the offspring not to make it in through the breeding season. So they have what's called in the literature insurance chicks. And just in case some of the eggs are addled or the oldest is injured or something, then the runts get to make it. But otherwise, what these birds do is they unlike songbirds that tend to incubate all at once, they wait till they've got the whole clutch before incubating. A lot of these raptors or some water birds, like herons, will incubate the moment the first egg is laid. So the first egg has a big head start on the next one and so on. And the ninth egg is just, probably the so small that that chick is not going to be able to compete with its larger siblings. And this can get quite ugly with great egrets in particular. These are great blue herons. And so great blue herons tend to be a little more forgiving of their siblings. They do spar a lot, but they often don't outright kill each other. Whereas in great egrets, siblicide is really the norm, which is a little dark. Oh, this is also a Californian picture I just threw in there because it was so fantastic. There's a great blue heron in San Francisco area, in the Bay Area. And I was wondering what this bird was doing poking around in the long grass. And suddenly it came up with this ground squirrel and killed it. And then the reason the squirrel looks really bedraggled in this photo is the heron proceeded to drown it, dunked it repeatedly in the water, and then flew away with it, which was, yeah, it was a really interesting experience. So it was a good lesson for just, watching a common bird for a while. Um, and oh, since my husband is busy taking care of our son right now, I thought I would make a nod to the shorebirds. So a lot of these are piping plovers, but a lot of plovers, especially different shorebird species, because their chicks are fluffy, they're what's called precocial. So they're quite independent compared to things like robin chicks, which are naked and unable to regulate their temperature and all that. It's possible for one parent to take care of the brood itself, which means there's an opportunity for the other parent to abscond for a while or altogether. And so, in terms of who takes care of the offspring, shorebirds tend to be way more flexible and variable, both within and across species, than a lot of other birds. And because there's also a lot of shorebirds, you can look for patterns in this. But one of my favorite examples is the Kentish plover, which is closely related to the snowy plover, where it really depends on almost like the marriage market, the mating market. So whichever sex is rarer is more in demand. Say the females are rarer, and so it's going to be easier for them to find another mate. They'll be the ones to abscond and leave the males taking care of the chicks because it's so much easier for the females to find the excess males in the population at that point. And there have been studies comparing different populations of Kentish plovers so that you know that within that species, it's really the availability of the other sex that determines who takes care of the chicks, if it's the males or the females. I've also got a chapter on what I call the women's lib chapter on the rarer cases where it's typically males that take care of the rather than females taking care of the chicks and males being all showy, it's the reverse. So these are Wilson's phalaropes that I was admiring in Montana, and they're not quite as extreme as many other phalarope species, but the more colorful individuals here are the females, whereas the drabber ones are the males, and the males are the ones that do all the childcare. The females don't do any of it in this species. And there's a female close up. And then there's another chapter on what happens once some of the other behaviors. So cooperative breeding is what I mentioned earlier, where you essentially have birds staying back or joining a group and rearing offspring together as a group in some way. And I put up this Canada Jay because the Canada jays and their relatives, the Siberian jays, have what's known as delayed dispersal, which I suspect people in LA would identify with. I know for sure in New York City it's a common problem that you just can't afford real estate as the real estate market is full. So as a young person, you pretty much have to stay with your parents or with an older, established person because you can't possibly afford or find a property of your own. And that's a very common strategy in many cooperative breeding species where you kind of hang out and help out your parents rear the next generation, care for the territory, do basic maintenance, until a space opens up, if it ever does, and sometimes it doesn't. And only one offspring would end up inheriting, if at all, the parent's property and the parent's territory. So it's it's an interesting route into group breeding. Um, Another example, which is very common in California, especially, is acorn woodpeckers. These are a little different from some of the other cooperative breeders because everyone breeds. So you don't have a situation where some of the individuals are foregoing their own reproduction, like in wolves or meerkats or something. In acorn woodpeckers, a lot of the individuals are paired up and they all try to have eggs, but there is still a dominant pair and they will sabotage some of the junior members' breeding attempts and eggs. The other cool thing about acorn woodpeckers is in California, in Northern California at least, they seem to need to have large groups of them in order to defend these enormous granaries. So acorn woodpeckers will essentially drill tiny holes into the trunks of trees, each one perfectly fitted to the acorn that they want to stash. And you end up with these trees, these granaries, with tons of trees, and each one having lots and lots and lots of acorns. And these have to be vigorously defended against other acorn woodpecker groups. And the sort of whole communal breeding success of that group depends on these granaries, which in turn depends on the size of the group. So what's fascinating about acorn woodpeckers is that's the lifestyle in Northern California. But in New Mexico, where they don't seem to need to defend these enormous granaries, or they don't have the resources that lend themselves to this kind of defense, in New Mexico, they're not as cooperative. They don't form the same big groups and they don't breed so cooperatively. Oh yes, and then the last chapter, which is my favorite sort of topic, is the outsourcing of childcare, which Marianne was mentioning, alluding to. So I did some of my postdoc research on species that outsource the childcare to other species, but I just wanted to give a nod to the ducks because they're the poster children for outsourcing the childcare within the same species. They're just very good at forcing other females to be nannies. So this is a common sight in some rivers. I remember seeing this a lot in Montana. You've got a female common merganser here with about 20 ducklings, and it's really not possible that she laid all those eggs. But what's really common is for females to do what's called egg dumping. They just wander around and sort of pop an extra egg or two into each other's nests. Common eiders do this a lot too. And in the case of common eiders, it's quite interesting. It's almost like extended cooperative breeding because you find that a lot of the females end up dumping the eggs, in a sense, into the nests of relatives. So yeah, it's not a total loss, right? You're still taking care of your nieces or nephews or something. But in many ducks, there's just rampant egg dumping, and there's no evidence of close genetic family relationships. They just everyone ends up with a glut of chicks, or some ducks end up with a glut of chicks. It also is one of the probable explanations behind a lot of the hybridization that you see, because like geese, ducks tend to imprint on whoever raised them and think that's their species, that's who to mate with. So if you happen to be dumped in the nest of a different duck by mistake, you grow up with a confused identity, and you might be a golden eye and you think you're actually um a scaup or something. So you end up with these hybrids because ducks are not quite knowing what to look for in a mate. And here we've got the North American example of outsourcing the childcare to a different species. So these are brown-headed cowbirds, two males on a bison. And they're called cowbirds originally because they would follow behind large herds of bison, now cows, more commonly, to gather up all the insects that would be basically churned up by the herd. And what's also interesting about the cowbirds, or more interesting about the cowbirds, arguably, is that they have no ability to make a nest at all. They're what's called an obligate brood parasite. And this has evolved only about 6 times across all birds. It's most famous in cuckoos, but none of the North American cuckoos, like roadrunners, are actually parasitic. So in addition to cuckoos, you've got cowbirds, which are the main North American example. And what these birds do is they essentially spend a heck of a lot of brain space and time monitoring, tracking the females of other species, watching exactly which stage of nesting those other species are, which we'll call hosts, and then timing the egg laying to coincide with exactly the right moment that the host is not there, has eggs all ready to be incubated, but not quite, and sort of sneak in an egg and then leave and let the host take care of everything. Let the host take care of this often much larger offspring, which tends to then, starve out the remaining chicks, the host's actual biological chicks, because they can't compete with this big thing. And yeah, takes over. And I was just talking about the imprinting with the ducks. So somehow magically these brood parasites grow up knowing who their own species is without ever having to learn it completely. It's a whole lot of amazing evolution. There's so many questions behind these brood parasites. And because of development in North America, it's also been a bit of a conservation problem for a lot of North America's songbirds. So brown-headed cowbirds used to be birds of the Great Plains, and a lot of the northeast and southeast was covered in forests, so they didn't get they were western birds. And with increasing development, their range has expanded tremendously over the last few decades, so that they now encounter host species that have never evolved with cowbirds and who are totally defenseless. It's like COVID coming in, or well, worse, it's like smallpox decimating a lot of native people, right? So native host populations totally naive. And one of the key examples of this is the Kirtland's warbler of Michigan. It's well, one of the last strongholds was Michigan, I should say. Um, and they need a really specific habitat, but also they were getting badly hammered by cowbirds because they'd never evolved against cowbirds, so they just didn't know what to look out for, and they would probably sit on a golf ball if you gave it to them. So there's been a lot of work by the US Fish and Wildlife Service and others to trap cowbirds as a way to help Kirtland's warbler survive. On the other hand, the yellow warbler I showed you a photo of earlier has co-evolved with cowbirds for longer. And so they've got fascinating, some museums you go to, you'll see about 7 layers of yellow warbler nests, one on top of another, and each layer is built on top of a cowbird egg. So it's like the yellow warblers came home, noticed this foreign egg, and went, no, no, but they're too small to really toss the egg out, so they just build another nest on top. And then the cowbird would come in and sneak its egg in. And if you do a cross section, it's phenomenal to see this behavior going on, this record of the behavior. And I just wanted to show you these eggs because they're so pretty. But this is one of the things I studied when I was doing a postdoc at Cambridge, and we would look at some of the less well-studied brood parasitic birds in Zambia, grassland birds. And one of the questions that drives a lot of evolutionary biologists is just, what are the forces behind so much diversity and so much beauty? And so all the tiny eggs from about 1/3 down are laid by different females of one species, of host, of a cuckoo finch host. So what seems to be going on here in a nutshell, there's like several species involved here, but essentially this brood parasite called the cuckoo finch has been co-evolving with different host species for a couple of million years at this point, we can tell from the genetics. And because of that, there's been an arms race, an evolutionary arms race of increasingly good forgeries and the hosts making it increasingly difficult to forge the eggs by having an increasing amount of diversity in both color and pattern. So that and I mean, talk about genetics of complex anything, complex genetics. This is really hard to figure out how a female can, of different females of one species can evolve to lay eggs of such different colors and patterns in a short time so as to minimize the chances of the eggs being matched by the parasite so that they can recognize that the parasite egg doesn't belong and reject it, toss it out. I can answer questions about this if that sounds garbled. And I just wanted to show you some of the nests because they were so beautiful. So this is one of the host nests that the cuckoo finch would lay in. And you can probably just barely make it out, but it's essentially living blades of grass stitched together from the inside with spiders' webs. So you can barely see it if you look at it from the side, which is how this photo was taken. Whereas if you look down from an aerial view, you can see how beautifully stuck together on the inside this nest is. And the other species, the other pair of parasites and hosts we were looking at in Zambia was this slightly Jekyll-Hyde combination. So the cute little things that look like Muppets are little bee-eater chicks that are about to fledge. So these made it. They were not parasitized. But the deadly-looking beast on the bottom right is a greater honey-guide chick. And it looks like this coming right out of the egg. And you notice that it's got this deadly-looking bill hook on both upper and lower mandibles. So the first thing a greater honey-guide chick does when it hatches is to stab all the host's own eggs or chicks, and as well as any other greater honey-guide eggs that might have been laid in the same nest. There's quite a lot of competition for host nests in the system. So often the greater honey-guides are stabbing the eggs of other female greater honey-guides. And it's quite brutal. This thing has barely, it can't even see, but it's capable of doing this. The flip side is greater honey guides are fascinating for their relationship with humans. So, we were talking about elk and oxpeckers and magpies and things, but greater honey guides are named for their ability to guide humans to indigenous human populations to honey, to bees' hives. And the greater honey guides, so let me see. Slides not here's a gentleman from Mozambique who's still a honey hunter. And the greater honey guides, what they get out of this whole system is they like eating beeswax. So different populations of greater honey guides will look for humans who are interested in the honey and make a special call, which the humans understand, and take the humans to a bee's nest, a bee's hive. And then the humans can, smoke the bees out so that it makes it easier for the greater honey guides to get the wax. And in return, the humans get as much honey as they like, and they don't have to search so hard for the bees. And there was a recent study, I think just a few months ago, by the same groups, Claire Spottiswoode, who from South Africa, who found that if you look at honey hunters in Tanzania and honey hunters in Mozambique, they have entirely different calls that they use to attract honey guides to say, I'm ready for honey, show me the honey. And the honey guides have learned these human signals in the different populations. So if you play back the calls, the human calls that the honey guides have not grown up listening to, they don't really respond. Whereas if it's the local humans, they do respond. But these are entirely wild birds. Their only contact with humans is through this honey hunting effort. It's a fascinating and fairly old behavior from what we can tell. And on the communication front too, this brings us full circle almost. Back to, this is a Japanese tit, but my son's been getting very interested in chickadees and he likes pointing them out. And so these are, the old world equivalent, Asian equivalent of chickadees. And they can basically distinguish, they have different alarm calls for predators that are like snakes that will invade a nest. And so if a female hears the alarm call that means snake, she'll fly out of the nest so that she's not attacked. Whereas if she hears an alarm call for an aerial visual predator, it's not a good idea to leave the nest because then you'll get munched by the sparrowhawk or whatever. So then at that point, she'll stay in. And you can do this experiment with playbacks and get the birds to behave accordingly. The chickadees story is that the more D's the chickadees attach to the end of the chickadee alarm call, the more dangerous the predator. And other chickadees seem to understand this, which is just wonderful. And I thought I'd end on a recent project I did in December where I was part of a art show depicting the work of a scientist who was studying hybridization between mountain and black-capped chickadees. So she found that in urban environments, you're more likely to see the evidence of at least ancient hybridization or hybridization a few generations ago. And she thinks this might be because of people feeding the birds a lot in the urban environments. So what I've got here is a series of greeting cards um, with a log cabin to depict the rural environment and a townhouse to depict the urban environment. And what my scientist collaborator, Catherine, really wanted me to show was that even though they're so well studied, chickadees, there's still so much to know about chickadees and that they're quite like humans. She wanted me to get that across too. So I thought for the inside of every greeting card, I would do a different picture of a chickadee family, almost like you're peering into someone's house and you get all the differences revealed once you look into the person's house rather than them all looking a bit similar from the outside. And a lot of this work was done through a citizen science, a community science effort. So Catherine basically had lots of people in Colorado checking nest boxes for her. So I thought the opening of the greeting cards was a bit like opening a nest box to find the present of the chickadee social behavior inside. And so this is the insides of some of the cards, and you can see all sorts of different stages of breeding, as well as the two different species, mountain and black-capped chickadees. And the idea was different viewers to the exhibition would be able to look at the cards and slowly observe patterns of the chickadee biology from looking at, whether or not certain species were more advanced in their breeding in the nesting stage, or if it turns out that mountain chickadees make better dads, better partners, and black-capped chickadees are more likely to abscond. So I have a few more black-capped chickadee single parents in the cards, things like that. That's just a fun recent project. And the last recent project was to do some posters and then stickers for a group in Belize. So that was fun too, just as a bit of art. Um, and I think I've been talking for a while, so should we take questions?
Sure. Thank you very much. I don't know if Marianne is ready to bring up
Sure,
questions that came up in chat.
sure. Pat Bates said that mentioned that our environment is awash in endocrine disruptors. And she asked
Oh,
if
yeah.
we have any good baselines for evaluating if patterns of, in birds are changing because of that.
I don't know actually the answer to that. So it's a wonderful question. I don't know if I don't know. Does anyone else?
No, I do have a question that may follow on to that. You talked in the beginning about female selection
Yes.
for mates, and there are a lot of examples of of female-driven characteristics in male birds. And one thing, in humans and primates, we have equivalent of taboos that prevent
Mhm.
inbreeding. And I would think that there would be a strategy for that in birds as well, but I
Yeah.
don't know about it. Do you?
Yes. I mean, I don't know the actual mechanisms behind it, but there is a lot of evidence that in avoiding inbreeding,
Mhm.
birds avoid inbreeding.
Right, right.
Um,
Well,
how they do it
it is
is
not just the color of the chest or the length of the
no,
tails,
no.
then there's something else.
Yeah, there's something else. Some of it is a rule of thumb based on who you grew up or where you grew up. So typically in birds, sorry, let me get this right. In mammals, typically the males disperse. So
Mm,
having one sex disperse is a nice mechanism for avoiding inbreeding because,
right.
you know, it, and in birds, typically females disperse more often than males. In more species. In the
So
majority of species,
by dispersal, you
yeah,
mean that, well, I
lethal.
don't know, I'm trying to figure out what that means. If,
Mm,
there's a nest full of chicks,
yeah,
they fledge, they migrate off to South America,
right.
they come back the next year, um, and then there's some sort of mechanism for saying, are you saying that the females just don't come back to the same area, or they,
That females typically, okay, well, let me back up. I guess I meant for the birds that tend to sometimes breed in groups or live in groups.
right?
So they may not migrate at all in
Ah,
some of
okay,
these species. But even if they do, if they're group breeders, it's often, it's more often sons that stay around on the
okay,
territory with their parents or nearby, and the daughters who leave
okay,
quite far. The one exception is the Seychelles warbler, where the females tend to be the ones that stay behind. But that's quite an exception for birds. But for songbirds, both would leave, and this is more like a chance thing that very unlikely that relatives would end up breeding.
so you
Um,
think it's more just randomization because they migrate
um,
to a place and then come back to something random? Is that what you're?
I mean, I think that takes care of a lot of it,
Uh-huh.
but um, in terms of the birds that do spend time together, then having one sex disperse more is a good way of
Right,
getting around. And there, I just don't know that we have evidence of the mechanism, how a bird knows, even if you did put close relatives together, if they'd never seen each other really, if they had a way of telling. I
right,
guess humans don't really either, necessarily.
okay,
I know there's wonderful evidence in mice of MHC, like
right,
um,
right,
you know, correlations with how genetically related the individuals are, and so with some human populations too. There's smell has been implicated in
right,
inbreeding avoidance with some inbred human populations as well. Yeah, it's a bit correlative,
right.
but
Well,
and
in
but there is
humans,
school.
I'm sorry,
Sorry.
in humans, there's the famous T-shirt experiment
Yes,
that,
exactly. The
uh,
Martha McClintock. Yeah.
right, but I don't know what the bird
There
equivalent
isn't
would
there
be.
isn't really a good bird t-shirt study I can think of, but I will say that there's evidence that birds smell a heck of a lot better than we thought they did
Oh, oh,
now.
okay,
It's not just vultures.
right,
So maybe birds, I mean, maybe in a bit we'll have evidence that birds can smell if they're too
okay,
closely related to interbreed.
right. Okay, well, I kind of cut in there. I should let Marianne
Sorry.
get back to culling
Well, just to
questions
kind
from.
of add on to that too, I was thinking about, in your book, there was a discussion of how this hasn't got to do with inbreeding, but somehow birds know that when times are fat, you will have more sons because those are kind of a high value spreader of genetics. And when times are hard, you may have more low value females. And that's just, I don't know how they figure that out.
I
It's
mean, I don't
astonishing.
think I guess I should preface that by saying it's not always the case that the sons are high value. Um, maybe we should rethink that as also the top sons, we were talking about the lacking system where a top male would you want to invest a lot in a child that's going to have, well, like in a Genghis Khan or something, in the reproductive sense, not in the massacre sense. Um, whereas a daughter in that sense would be more like a safe bet. She wouldn't be a nothing. She would never you should never produce as many grandchildren as a son would. Does that so if you're going to invest in a son, it had better be a winner
Mhm.
or don't do it.
Mhm.
I think that's more
Okay.
but
Okay,
yeah, I guess this is an area where I wouldn't translate straight from the bird or another species to
right.
humans
Now,
Uh,
Paula
unless
asked
we were
about
an
speaking
empath.
of messing
But
about, Paula asked if there was any reason for the fairy wrens, having
mhm.
these illicit things and having an
Yeah,
extra female and so on.
right,
Uh,
right. Yes, plenty. I mean, for both sides. So especially with the fairy wrens, but with all these birds, the extra pair copulations, this is not just one side, the male or the female that's benefiting. It's often it's often a bet hedging strategy. I mean, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So having a bit of extra genetic it's like a diversified portfolio of investments.
mhm.
Think about it that way, right? You don't want to team up your genes with only one partner if that partner might not have the right genes for the next environment or something. So it's not a bad idea if you've got extra time to spread it, to diversify your portfolio a bit. So that's one common explanation. Another is, I mean, maybe some individuals are just a better match, but that's not so much the explanation for fairy wrens, superb fairy wrens. They're really doing it.
So that's the
This.
reason to have um, copulation outside your mated pair. I think the question also was why keep it secret? And
You
I,
get punished
yeah, oh yeah,
or you get retaliation.
ah. Well, I was thinking, you're counting on that male that you're cuckolding to come and help feed and build a nest and guard
Right.
and so on.
Yeah.
Um,
But if he knows, he may not.
right, yeah,
I
or
mean,
in some
so
cases, he may decide to kick them out. Uh,
right.
I mean, the fairy wrens are a really special case. A lot of the time, the extra pair copulations are taking place with that male's relatives, so the genes he's not losing that much from sharing the copulations with his brothers or his, you know, sons. But to get back to the why keep it secret, it's quite fascinating. Yeah, I mean, females will do quite what they can to maintain the help of the male. And males will do what they can to have more nests than so I think European starlings have been known to almost apparently appear to deceive prospective mates by having one or two nests fairly far apart so that the females don't know that another female exists, another family exists.
Hmm,
And then the male spreads himself a bit thin, going to both, helping with both, or he just
like that.
doesn't show up for one of them. Um,
So
yeah.
Kathy mentioned how difficult it was to watch, the great egrets where they had a nest.
Oh, yes. I've
Ay,
never
ay,
seen
ay.
that. I've never seen that in person. I've seen them sparring, but I've never seen the actual really killing scenes. But the Greater Honey Guides were awful. That was awful to watch because those um those honey guides look quite monstrous, even though they're tiny. And the bee eaters look so defenseless, and they are. Um, and that was not fun. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I
So
mean,
I guess the question that I have is your illustrations are so charming.
oh, thank you.
Do you distribute them or sell them in any fashion
I
or
should
I think you
figure out how to
should.
do more with
Yeah,
that. I
yeah,
really enjoy it, but I'm not formally trained, and it's something I find I'm doing more of now that I have a kid and I can draw with him a lot.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I was
but
just thinking about the merganser with,
oh
her
yes.
huge line of chicks, and then my mind immediately went to Mother's Day card, you know?
Yes, yes.
All sorts of things like that. I
That's
mean, so many of
yeah,
your cards
that's
are,
pretty much how I started. I would draw my mum. Oh dear, my chick is calling. I would draw my mum birthday cards, Mother's Day cards, Christmas cards. I'd draw people thank you cards. So that's pretty much what I use it for.
all right.
But
Well,
yeah,
please consider.
okay.
I think you have a market in the Audubon Society.
Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. All right. I don't see any other
Well,
questions.
Kathy mentioned that she says acorn woodpeckers have a very complex system to prevent interbreeding, but don't ask her to explain it. So maybe we can ask Wenfei to explain it.
Oh no, let me see if I can remember this. I know I wrote about it, but it is complicated. So, um, I think acorn woodpeckers are one of the species where because they are in the cooperative breeding populations. Is it one of the species where one sex disperses more? I can't really remember. But the other cool thing about acorn woodpeckers is because everyone basically you've got multiple pairs all joining forces to be in the same group, but they're all producing their own offspring um as well. That doesn't answer the inbreeding question though.
What I remember is that
Yeah,
there is some specific process that happens. For example, if the female of the dominant pair dies, then it's like a total disruption of
that's right.
the
That's
whole group. And there's like rules. There's no more mating until all the females leave or
That's right.
all the
All the
males born.
females, all yeah,
Something
yeah.
crazy like that.
Right,
But
right.
it's
You're right.
incredibly complicated.
Yeah. The other amazing phenomenon is, I mean, you get this from ants to meerkats, is just reproductive suppression of all the other junior, the less dominant individuals by the dominant ones, so that only one pair is breeding. But that's the funny thing about the acorn woodpeckers is they all they all get to breed a bit. So it's extra complicated. I guess all her daughters have to leave if she's yeah. Anyway, sorry, I can't remember.
No, well, that's great. I know that Kathy would like to do a wrap up here, and it was really fabulous. I really enjoyed it, and
Oh, thank you all.
yeah,
Pat, you had your hand up. Did we?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Um, I wanted to just say your artwork is gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
In addition to being on the board of San Fernando Valley Audubon Society. I'm on the board of the San Fernando Valley Arts and Cultural Center.
Oh,
And we're having an online exhibit called Call of the Wild coming up soon. And I'll contact you offline about that.
oh, thank you.
Thank you. And it's just lovely. It just makes everyone love birds.
Oh,
And that's what we all want to do. The other thing, before I kind of changed careers, my research was in basically looking at effects of very tiny amounts of androgenic, mostly androgenic precursors and hormones on subsequent like brain uptake of steroids and behavior and a lot of things. And I think your work is stunning because it's setting baselines for us, because I work with rats and guinea pigs for the most part. I know virtually nothing about birds, but this scares me because we have got so many environmental, we've got fake grass with stuff. We've got this chemical, we've got that chemical, we've got, oh my goodness, you look at what's going through the sewage treatment plant. It's got
yeah,
Viagra, it's got birth control, it's got, what do you call it? I don't even remember what all. But
yeah,
all of these things they can be very subtle endocrine disruptors.
right.
And, you know, I think number one, it's miraculous that, you know, bird behavior is so consistent and sustainable. But I think establishing baselines is crucial at this point.
Yeah. And it's actually so plastic as well, and the endocrine pathways are very conserved. Sorry, I didn't answer your question very well then, but there are studies that use, like a lot of people interested in behavioral interactions, people will do temporary either stress hormone
Mhm.
challenges on birds, or testosterone is the
Yeah.
main one that you yeah, but it's so
Well, you know,
complicated.
of course, if you've got a stressed bird, now
Yeah.
with a stressed mammal, it's dumping out a lot of things that are androgenic precursors. But with birds, I don't know what they do. I need to do some reading. It's been a
The
long time.
pathways are quite conserved, I think.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of how deeply related some of these pathways is the hormone prolactin that's involved in regulating fluids. Sorry, my son's trying to break in. And let down of milk and other such things. I think it's a similar, if the sequence of the gene that gives rise to that hormone is similar in pigeons for the release of crop milk.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
it's very cool.
Anyhow,
Yeah,
thank you so
sorry.
much.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Wenfei. That was